Have you ever heard of a city? A magnificent, sprawling capital of a powerful empire that just disappeared from memory for centuries? Well, today we're diving into the story of one such place, Vijayanagara, a lost city you probably know today by the name of its stunning ruins, Hampi.
But that brings up a really fascinating question, doesn't it? When an entire capital city is swallowed up by time and nature, where do you even begin to piece its story back together? That's the journey we're going to take, a real-life archaeological detective story. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how this lost empire was rediscovered. Then, we'll explore its incredibly smart defenses and water systems. After that, we'll walk through its royal and sacred centers. And finally, we'll try to meet the everyday people who call this amazing city home. Let's get into it. Now, you'd think our story would start back in the 14th century when the empire was founded, but nope. We're actually starting much later, in the year 1800. This is the moment the modern world first started to pull back the curtain on this forgotten capital. I mean, just look at this gap in time. For over 200 years, Vijayanagara was a powerhouse, and then pretty much radio silence. It wasn't until 1800 that an engineer from the East India Company, a guy named Colonel Colin Mackenzie, literally stumbled upon these ruins. And get this, it took another 50-plus years before photographers even started to create a visual record of what he'd found. Putting this story together was like assembling a giant historical puzzle with pieces scattered everywhere. Mackenzie's first clue actually came from priests at the Virupaksha temple, which was still active. From there, historians started adding more and more pieces: survey maps, those early photographs, translated inscriptions found on temple walls, and even diaries from foreign travelers and local literature. Slowly but surely, a picture of the lost city started to take shape. Okay, so what did this incredible city actually look like? Well, the very first thing you'd notice is its defenses. The rulers of Vijayanagara had a really unique and frankly a brilliant strategy for fortification. Okay, this is where things get really clever. Think about it. Most medieval sieges were designed to starve a city into surrender. So what did Vijayanagara's rulers do? They built their massive walls around the farmland itself. This was a game changer. It meant their food supply was protected. The upside? They were basically siege-proof. The downside? It was insanely expensive to build and maintain, and you needed a huge army to defend such a massive perimeter. A brilliant but costly gamble. So, the city was safe from invaders, but it faced another, even more relentless enemy: the environment itself. Let's look at the engineering marvel that literally kept the city alive. Right, this is the big question. Vijayanagara is located in a really dry, rocky part of the peninsula. So how on earth did it support a huge population? The answer, it turns out, is some of the most brilliant water management you'll ever see. Their solution was a true engineering marvel, and it basically boiled down to 3 steps. First, they worked with what nature gave them, harnessing the natural basin formed by the Tungabhadra River. Second, they built massive reservoirs, like the famous Kamalapuram tank, to store every single drop of river and rainwater. And finally, they created this incredible network of canals that distributed that precious water to fields and all the way into the city's royal center. And speaking of the royal center, let's step into what was supposed to be the administrative and ceremonial heart of the empire. This was the seat of power, for sure, but as we're about to see, it's not quite what that name might make you think. You know, this is something historians have been debating for years. While it was obviously a super important area, just calling it the royal center might be a little misleading. The evidence we find on the ground tells a much more complicated and, frankly, more interesting story. So let's break down the debate. For starters, look at the ratio of buildings. We found over 60 temples in this area, but only about 30 structures that look like palaces. That's a huge tell. Even the building we call the King's Palace has no definitive proof that a king actually lived there. And other stunning buildings like the Lotus Mahal, we're still not totally sure what they were used for. All this evidence suggests the royal center was just as much about public religion and ritual as it was about royalty. And the centerpiece of this ritual life was the Mahanavami Dibba. This was a massive platform used for the huge 9-day Mahanavi festival. And this wasn't just a party. It was an awe-inspiring show of power. I mean, just imagine it. Ceremonies worshiping the state horse, grand processions with elephants and soldiers, wrestling matches, and powerful chiefs, the Nayakas, all lining up to present gifts and tribute to the king. It must have been an incredible sight. All right, let's shift our focus now from the center of earthly power to the center of faith. The rulers of Vijaynagara didn't just build a city, they crafted an entire landscape of devotion, and they expressed it through some truly mind-blowing temple architecture. So to understand their style, you have to know this word, gopuram. These are the towering, incredibly ornate gateways you see at temples. But the Vijayanagara kings did something totally unique. They started building gopurams that were even taller than the central shrines themselves. The message was loud and clear. The king's power and wealth made this holy place possible. And their innovations didn't stop at the gate. Inside, they added huge pillared halls called mandapas for public ceremonies, and they commissioned these jaw-droppingly carved pillars. But one of their coolest and most unique creations was the Chariot Street. These were long, paved avenues leading out from the temple gate, designed for huge festival processions, but also doubling as bustling marketplaces. So we've seen the city's defenses, its water supply, its grand buildings. But a city is always more than just stone, isn't it? For our last stop, let's try to picture the ordinary people who actually lived here, who called this magnificent place home. Just try to imagine these streets buzzing with life. You'd see these specialized horse traders, the Kadire Chettis, haggling alongside local merchants. You'd hear the clang of ironsmiths and the saws of carpenters. There were entire communities of weavers, the Kaikol, who lived right near the temples. And you'd see powerful landowning groups like the Reddys moving through a crowd that included people from every single walk of life, all of them making up the living, breathing fabric of this incredible society. You know, the most amazing thing is that even after 2 centuries of study, we've really only scratched the surface. Hampi isn't just a monument, it's a massive ongoing puzzle. And it really makes you wonder, from all these scattered ruins and fragmented records, what other secrets of daily life in this empire are still out there, just waiting to be told?